Good evening, everyone. It's Susanna Birch here with you tonight, and we are, of course, talking about Twitter. Now, thank you for joining me here tonight. It is an interesting topic. If you are here, you probably already know about Business Station, but if you don't, it's a great opportunity for small businesses to receive some one-on-one and group help for their business. So if you haven't signed up for the amazing 7-hour program that Business Station runs, for just $44, it's worth checking it out. And I'll talk about that a little more at the end. However, tonight we are talking about Twitter and doing an introduction to this fantastic platform, which is hugely underrated in some segments of the market. Now, I personally love Twitter, but I get that not everyone does. So thank you for taking some time out this evening to learn more about the platform. Now, there are some people with us tonight, but of course there will be some people who will also be watching the replay. So hello, whether you're joining us live or later. Anyway, we'll get straight into it. My name is Susanna Birch, and I've been working in digital marketing since 2009, over a decade. I originally began as someone who was self-taught, and I grew my own websites, grew my own social followings, learnt a lot along the way. And then I began working in agencies, in marketing roles, and eventually did a marketing degree. Now, I have over 50,000 of my own Twitter followers, and if you can't tell, I love Twitter. Now, I use it for a range of reasons, and it is one of those platforms that does take some time to understand the nuances of. And when I first began on Twitter back in, I think it was, I signed up for an account back in 2009, but I didn't actually actively use it for a long time. So I really got into it around 2013, 2014. And I did that because I like a challenge and I hated Twitter. And I decided that I'd cut back on all my other social media platforms and just devote a year to figuring out how Twitter worked. And now it's actually my favorite platform. So it is one of those platforms that takes time to learn, but it can be an amazing place once you get your head around it. So I definitely recommend spending some time on the platform. Now, I've also studied journalism, and journalists are one of the biggest groups that exist on Twitter. The reason for this is because the site often is the best place to go for breaking news. And of course, journalists always want to be on the cutting edge of whatever's happening. So, next slide. What is Twitter? Because it's not the same as all the other platforms out there that most people use day to day, such as Instagram, which is based around photos, and Facebook, which is based around small friend-based communities. No, Twitter is not a bird watching site. It may have a bird and the iconic wow that went with it, but it is much more than just a site where people chirp or tweet. So, a little introduction about Twitter. It has a limit of 280 characters per tweet, which can feel very limiting, but I found it makes people better writers. The reason for this is you've got to really be succinct in what you've got to say, and you don't have to spend all this time with background information and going into deep areas of your content. Just say something, summarize it, and go from there. It's really about starting conversations. However, you've got it easy these days. It was half that length back probably 4 or 5 years ago, I think, when it was just 140 characters, which was barely 2 sentences if you really squish them in together. So these days you can fit sometimes a little longer in terms of content into your tweets, which does make it easier for people who really have a lot to say and they've got to really push those words into those tweets. However, it can still be quite limiting if you're used to working with platforms, especially like Facebook, where people do really big, long posts, and Instagram, where often people microblog. So Twitter was one of the original microblogs where you were really limited to a micro amount of content, unlike other platforms out there. Now, it's also known as an online news and social networking site. Online news in particular, because unlike sites like, say, LinkedIn or Facebook, you are going to see most often whatever is trending and the latest things happening around a topic. For instance, on Facebook, you might see a post about a friend having a birthday party, but you might see it 4 or 5 days after the party actually happened. It's great if you weren't planning to go, but if you were thinking about going and you needed that extra reminder, well, oops, you probably missed out. However, Twitter is much more rapid and fast-paced, and that means that you can find out what's happening around any topic, trend, or news event in the world much more rapidly than you would on any of the other platforms, which is why it's so popular for a news source. Now, it's also popular for microblogging and citizen journalism. If you don't have time for an entire website but still want to build a following, it's a great place to connect with people with short, sharp pieces of information, thoughts, news, data, all sorts of things. And also it's a great place where people can actually report live something that's happening, even though they are not a journalist or news site. What this means is, for instance, say there are currently Queensland floods underway. Anyone down in Sydney who is currently in the midst of this terrible flooding can tweet, and because it will go into a stream related to the content around Sydney floods, what will happen is many people can see these live reports. So you're not depending on a journalist to get somewhere, find out the information and report. You can see it live on the ground as it's happening from people who are really there. So it's a great way to get first-hand news that way, outside the reach of the media. It's also popular among celebrities. So there's a lot of celebrities who actually use it to engage with their fans and followers. And there are a lot of big, as they called, fan armies, where huge groups of fans of a particular artist or singer or actor will actually meet, talk, and discuss that celebrity. And often the celebrities will go on there and engage with those people more than they do in most other platforms. And of course, everyday people use it as well. There are all sorts of people who use it. I'm one of them. But that said, there are people from all walks of life. And it is a platform that probably is well known politically, but there are so many other groups of niche audiences that you can engage and connect with on there as well. And it is growing in Australia, and it is a great way to connect, depending if your target market is there or you're looking for people to collaborate with for your business. So why is Twitter so popular? Well, some people would argue it's not popular, but they haven't been on there recently, have they? Now, it's not popular with everyone. Of course, it's not going to satisfy the needs of every target demographic, and that's okay. Not everyone can be Facebook and try and keep everyone happy all the time. Twitter is fairly good at knowing how people use its platform, and so it can attract the people that really enjoy that kind of content style. Some reasons it's so popular include the fact that scan-friendly content. Whereas going on some platforms like Facebook, you might have to scroll and scroll just to see 6 posts or 8 posts. On Twitter, you can quickly get an overview of a topic or see a conversation happening without having to spend hours going through and finding things related to it. It's much easier to search than most other social media platforms, or even following people and seeing what appears in your live feed, because it's also instantaneous. There are some algorithms in place, so certain people that you engage with more, you will see more tweets from them. But that said, overall, you'll find the content is fairly rapid and easy to look at and gain an overall perspective of what is happening among the people you're following at any given point. Now, another big thing that's popular about Twitter is the fact there's no privacy walls. Whereas over on Facebook in particular, and even sites like Instagram, you often have people who essentially, they only add people they're friends with, and they keep their content behind privacy walls. Even on Instagram, for instance, if you're not regularly using hashtags, only people following you will actually see your content. On Facebook, if you're not friends with someone and you post friends-only content, no one will see it except your very select group of friends. Twitter, on the other hand, well, they promote public content and push it and make sure it's seen. So the great thing about Twitter is that if you tweet something, anyone in the world can see and engage with it if you're using words around the trending topic. So you don't even need to be using hashtags for your content to get seen in feeds. Often it comes down to the fact that, for instance, someone's using words like Prime Minister, and then any tweet that mentions the word Prime Minister in it will actually start trending, and people can view all those tweets as they happened or based on how much engagement they have. Now, as I've mentioned earlier, another big draw card for Twitter is the fact that it's time-friendly content. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, as I said, basically, you want to know what's happening right now in the world, you can find out on any topic. Twitter just makes it so easy to get that data. Now, the last one is quick connections. On sites like LinkedIn or Facebook, you'll have to connect with a person and request, and they'll have to accept. Twitter isn't based around that. It's more in some ways like a Facebook page in that way. You can follow someone, but they won't necessarily follow you back. There are celebrities who might have millions of followers who are engaging with their content, but they might only follow a few hundred. Now, most people on Twitter actually follow many hundreds or thousands of people. This is a difference, again, between Twitter and most other platforms. What you'll find is that people want a really interesting newsfeed. So much like you might follow hundreds of Facebook pages, you might also follow hundreds of Twitter accounts so that you can find out what's happening among different content types on different businesses, different people, different celebrities, and see what they're doing, all in your main Twitter feed. So, Twitter. What are the main things that you're going to be doing when you're on Twitter? Now, a big one is conversations, and I love this about Twitter. Whereas if you comment on a post on LinkedIn or Facebook, for instance, you'll find that you might get a little bit of engagement with the replies, but people can't grab those replies and treat them like a standalone post. The great thing about Twitter is every single tweet can exist on its own, essentially, which means that people can engage with your tweet, and that tweet can actually go more viral than the original content you're applying to. So here's an example on the left. Old Spice is well known, and they tweeted back in 2012. It's an old tweet, but it's a fun example because they have some really fun content to engage with. So they've asked, why is it that fire sauce isn't made with any real fire? Seems like false advertising. Now, Taco Bell has made a comment. Is your deodorant made with really old spices? It's got 937 retweets. Now, the people who retweeted that are sharing it with their followers, and it's standalone content which doesn't need to be seen in conjunction with Old Spice. And again, someone's replied to Taco Bell with, is your bell really made of tacos? So there's some humor going on, which is really common for Twitter. And it's got 15 retweets. So each of those tweets can stand on its own and are getting engagement because they replied to the original tweet. So to get that kind of engagement, it's well worth engaging with larger accounts and brands. Unlike, for instance, Facebook, where sometimes commenting won't get you a huge reach, it's really valuable to comment and engage with other people on Twitter. Now, the important thing to remember is that you want your tweet to be able to stand alone. For instance, if someone had tweeted about trees being great for sustainability, if you just said, yes, I agree about trees being important, that's not really retweetable. It doesn't stand alone. It's obviously only relevant when you're replying to the original tweet. However, if you can frame it in such a way that the tweet can stand on its own, even though it's part of a conversation, it can often get great engagement. So here's an example of how I'd reframe that. Yes, I agree trees are important for long-term health and sustainability in cities because, and you then insert a connected reason that that would be so. So it's worth thinking about, if I read this tweet on its own, would it make any sense? And make sure your tweet is written like that, which is a great way to have engagement. So again, make sure you're engaging in conversation with people in your industry and brands using your brand or personal Twitter account, depending which one you are trying to grow. Another big thing on Twitter is trends. So as you can see here, there's some big trends there today around International Women's Day, breaking the bias, Sydney storms, and so on. So you can track these topics as they trend, and then you can engage with them. And because so many people are engaging, there's also many people looking to read and retweet and comment on these different tweets. So it's well worth going through the trends, seeing what relates to your business or your personal chosen topics, and then seeing if you can tweet and comment or engage with other people tweeting about those types of topics, and of course engaging with them as you can in relation to your personal brand or your business. So it's worth checking out the trends because it's a quick way to get an overview of what people are talking about and starting those important conversations on Twitter. Hashtags. Now, the really cool thing about hashtags was that Twitter was one of the first platforms to properly use hashtags and make them into a way of collating topics together. Now, what does that mean? It means that if you click on, say, hashtag small biz, you'll see any tweet that mentions small biz. So you'll be able to get a feed of anything related to that topic, which makes it much easier for you to engage with your industry or category without having to have tweets that aren't really relevant to you. The other great thing that I love about hashtags on Twitter is you can search multiple hashtags at once. So for instance, if you type in hashtag Australia and hashtag small biz, you'll find tweets that mention both of these. So that way you're not going to be seeing tweets about small biz over in America or in the UK. So the other great thing you can do, you don't even have to use a hashtag in search. You can just type in any set of words and put in as many words as you want to narrow down the topic. For instance, say you're looking for a journalism request. In other words, a journalist who wants to have people pitch them an idea for a news article. You might put in journo request and then your industry, which might be cars. You'll then be able to easily see every tweet that mentions journo request and cars, and you can even sort them by the latest topics. This is awesome because it means that you can immediately see if anyone has recently tweeted about those topics, and it's much easier to see than it might be on some other platforms such as Facebook, where you've got very limited search functionality. Instead on Twitter, you can see all the tweets that mention your search terms. Now, the other cool thing when you're doing a tweet is that Twitter will actually tell you how popular a hashtag is. So for instance, here's an example from today where I started typing International Women's Day. As you can see, there's over 3,000 tweets in just the last hour on this topic. So that means it's quite busy trending and it's worth jumping on and having your say or adding to the conversation. So it is worth adding some hashtags to your tweets, but I wouldn't go overboard. If you're using too many hashtags, it's difficult to read your content, especially if they're in the middle. I'd put your hashtags at the end of your content or tweet, and I'd probably have no more than 2 or 3 maximum, or if relevant, for instance, International Women's Day, I'd use just one single hashtag because really you don't need more than that. That's the topic you're trying to talk about. So I wouldn't recommend going over the top, but they can be a fantastic way to engage with people who really wanted to discuss different content around that particular topic. Just a short note on controversy. every social media platform out there, of course, you can have controversy, but Twitter, because it doesn't have the same privacy walls as many other platforms, content can go viral and it can get a lot of different mixed opinions. People on Twitter seem much more opinionated on certain things, and often those things can fall into medical or politics and so on. And most people seem to have very strong opinions. So if you're going to tweet something, do be mindful of how controversial it might be and be prepared for the different reactions you're going to get if you're aware it's a controversial topic. If your business has a brand which doesn't really delve into controversy, I would recommend avoiding those things and just stick with your industry-related content in non-controversial ways, unless you really are that brave. Now, another thing to keep in mind, unlike Facebook, for instance, where you can hide a comment on a post or delete a comment or even block a user and have all their content disappear, you don't have all those options on Twitter. Now, on Twitter, you can't actually delete when someone replies to your tweet. You can hide it, but people can still see that it's been hidden. And if you block the person, you won't be able to see their tweets, but all the people who are viewing the tweet can still see their comment. So it is well worth keeping in mind that you need to be careful from a PR perspective on Twitter, simply because you can't delete those tweets, and it's worth knowing how you're going to reply to them, or if you're going to hide them and have a strategy apart from trying to get rid of them. Just keeping that in mind if you're going to plan to be controversial. So, who is using Twitter? Other than me, of course. I know I hear a lot of people go, you're the only person we know who uses Twitter, but actually there are thousands and thousands of people, probably just in your town, who use it, depending where you're located, of course. I know in Toowoomba, there's probably over 2,000 Twitter accounts, I think, of Toowoomba users, possibly more. But the thing to keep in mind is that not everyone puts their location on Twitter, and it is a site where a lot of people remain anonymous. What that means is they might use a pseudonym or a nickname and don't actually put enough information to identify them. But that doesn't mean they're not following along based on your location or industry in the local area. So what kind of topics are people talking about on Twitter? Here are a few that there's some amazing communities around on the platform. Startups, so anyone talking about getting investors, creating a new product, creating a new service, creating a new app, anything like that. There is an amazing startup community on Twitter where people really engage and help each other and really spread awareness around new projects. So it's a great way to engage with brands in that way as well. Now, agriculture is another big one. There's a huge number of farmers, particularly in Australia, who use it to actively keep up with the latest tech trends and updates around the farming community. They also keep up with things such as the weather, because obviously you can get better updates around changes to the weather, to flooding, to dry spells, all that kind of data on a platform like Twitter, where you're getting it much, much more rapidly. As I mentioned earlier, journalism is big on the site, simply because there's so much trending recent news that journalists often use it to find stories and sources for their outlets. Another big one that it's most well known for, Twitter loves politics. It is huge for politics, and the hashtag Auspol, which stands for Australian politics, is one that is used regularly and probably is one of the biggest in Australia. It's worth using it sometimes if you're talking about something slightly political, but do be careful, because there are some people with strong opinions on both sides of the fence, and you can get yourself in a bit of trouble if you're dipping into a topic you are fully informed about. Another big one is history, interestingly enough. So there are a lot of history accounts on Twitter. There are old photos, historical facts, museums, all different content around things like that. And there's some really interesting information out there if you're looking to engage with that kind of community. That also includes groups like genealogy and finding your family history as well. Another huge one is writing, and there's actually some amazing events around writing in particular. For instance, there are set days where people can pitch their book manuscript to publishers. There are some amazing writing groups and ways you can engage with hashtag writing community, for instance, or you can use hashtags like hashtag #amwriting or #amreading. There's just an amazing community of people who engage together and get reviews for their books, tell each other about their new works, get beta readers, and so much more. So if you're an author, it's well worth checking out engaging with that community. Another one, as I mentioned earlier, is fan accounts. There are some amazing groups of fan accounts, and although it sounds a bit boring if you're not a fan of any celebrity, they also are known to actually get involved in big trending topics. So sometimes there might be some people who have some arguable opinions on Twitter, and some of the fan armies have been known to drown out that content with tweets so that it disappears and stops trending, or the trending topic is full of their celebrities' images. So they can be useful, and you probably will come across a fan army or a few of them at some point on Twitter, depending where you end up. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, trending news is a big topic as well. So if something happens, it's worth sharing on Twitter because that's where people go for the latest on the ground news around different topics. Another big one is mental health, and there's an amazing mental health community on Twitter. Now, I'm part of this community as well as the writing community. And there are many different bloggers, podcasters, and people who talk about mental health on Twitter that are worth engaging with if that's an area you're interested in. Another really big one is sustainability. So this is things like renewables, electric vehicles, and topics like that. So if you're in this area or your business is, it's worth thinking about how you can engage with it because there are some amazing experts. And also there are some great brands on there and news sites which are worth engaging with, learning from, and joining conversations with. So, Twitter people. What type of people are using Twitter? 63.7% are male. That's not to say there isn't an amazing female community too, but it's worth keeping in mind if your target demographic is male. 80% are affluent millennials. So that is an aging market because everyone makes the assumption that millennials are still the 20 to 35-year-olds. We're not. We're more the 25 at the minimum, possibly 28, probably going up to 40 or a bit older now. So that is a really good target demographic for some different audiences. And there's also some much younger people on there as well, but those are more the ones that are interested in celebrities, memes, and so on. So if you're after the millennials, the ones who are decision makers, the ones who are influencers, those are the ones who are hanging on Twitter the most. Now, another couple of facts to keep in mind is that 77% earn over $75,000 a year. And that is something to keep in mind because that will impact the type of items and services they're wishing to invest in. So if you've got a business which has a higher priced item, it might be worth thinking about whether your target demographic is hanging out on Twitter. Now, another thing to keep in mind, usually the people who are on there have a higher chance of some sort of degree, and in many cases they are higher educated. This can be taken as a good or bad thing depending what industry you're in. However, it does mean they can be more informed and have stronger opinions about certain things. And generally, if you don't know what you're talking about, you might get called out. So do take care. I've seen a lot of brands learn that the hard way. Now, here's a fact that is really useful as well. 93% of Twitter users are open to brands getting involved if it's done in the right way. And there are some big brands that do some amazing work on Twitter that really engages their target market, gets people laughing, gets people talking, gets people buying. So, how do you craft a great tweet? Let's talk about some of the key points on how you should do that. A great tweet, it includes a mix of some of these important factors. Informed or well thought out opinions. Twitter loves opinions. So if you've got a unique perspective on something that's in the news or even a topic where it's related to your industry, it's worth tweeting it. And it's worth tweeting it succinctly in such a way that people will want to share it with their own networks. Valuable new data or insights. It might be yours, it might be a news piece that you saw and you can provide a quote from it to share with your network. So not all content has to be yours. As long as you tell people where you got it, you can prove yourself as an expert on Twitter just by adding your own opinion and sharing happening things in your industry. So think about how you can add your own unique perspective, say to a news piece or a piece of content that's recently been released. Content that stands alone, as I mentioned, is great simply because people retweet everything. And if there is a tweet that can stand on its own without any other context needed, it's a quick and easy way for people to share what you've got to say. Now, of course, if you can tap into trends and news topics, that's another big bonus as well. So if you do see something that's trending where your industry or you personally can have an opinion, as long as it's not too controversial, of course, it's worth hopping on the bandwagon and seeing if you can add your voice to that trend. But again, make sure it's content that stands alone in relation to that topic. So what about humor? Humor is a big one on Twitter, and it's a really good way to engage your brand with the followers or even with people who aren't yet your followers and increase your reach. So here are some good examples. The Weetabix one was very, very famous, and it actually made it to the UK Parliament. As you can see here, it was a bit of a joke. It wasn't actually done on April Fool's Day, but they shared a photo of Weetabix being covered in baked beans, and many brands and people engaged with that on Twitter, and it actually went extremely, extremely viral. So being funny really works well on Twitter. Polls also work as well. As you can see with Old Spice, well, you can be a bit funny with your polls as well. Now, Moonpie is probably one of my favorites. They're known for being really funny and engaging, and they're not all about selling. They're just around brand awareness, reminding people they're there and reminding people they're really, really, really funny. Many people have said that Moonpie seems to be run by a 12-year-old who actually is really good at Twitter. And it wouldn't surprise me if the social media team turned out to be some quite young, tech-savvy people. However, they make some really funny replies and comments, and it's worth checking out how they engage with their Twitter audience. So as you can see, they've always got something to say on different topics. So what kind of tweets do people make? Just like many other platforms, you've got variety. Variety is key on any social media platform. If you're always tweeting the same type of content, you're either going to attract the same type of people, or you're going to find that people don't want to engage with you because that's not the type of content they want to see. So ensuring you've got a variety of content is well worth it, because it means that you'll be engaging with multiple people in your target demographic. So humor, of course, is great. Quotes, whether they're from people in your industry, people you see at conferences, from books, whatever is relevant, quotes do really well on Twitter. Polls, as we've seen, polls are great, and you can really engage with your audience using polls. Conversations, you can always start conversation with a question. And the next topic, of course, is questions. Don't be afraid of asking Twitter questions. Like every social media platform, people on Twitter love having an opinion to share. And if you ask them their opinion, they will definitely give it to you. So you can do polls, you can do questions, you can say, which do you prefer, this or that? Or where can I buy this product? How can I engage over here? What do you like about this? Ask their opinion. They will definitely give it to you. Videos are big as well. However, it does depend on your industry. Some industries don't like videos as much, or they don't trend to the same degree. So again, it's about variety. See if you can create something, test it out, and if it doesn't work, try a different type of content, mix it up. And of course, data. If you have any kind of data or news trend, it's well worth sharing that, because Twitter really loves new facts and information that it can share with its network. So if you have data, whether it's about the type of product you have or the ingredients in something or how something is made or how it works, or even the history of it, Twitter loves that type of content. So a question I hear a lot is, how often should you tweet? Now, it is a bit different than other platforms. For instance, on LinkedIn or Facebook, I often tell people, hey, you should only probably post once or twice a day so that you get that key engagement with each one of your posts and you're not flooding the feed and saturating the feed of the people following you. Twitter is a little bit different though. On average, 5 or more tweets per day lead to the greatest engagement and growth. Now, don't get overwhelmed. Tweets don't have to be as complex as, say, a Facebook post might be. Often they might be a single sentence or two. This can be something like a quote from a blog post you've done, or something quick and even a shower thought, something quick and to the point, or a quote, poll, anything. You don't have to spend all the time overthinking it like you might on some platforms, especially such as Instagram, where you have to put so much time and effort into a single post. Twitter's very much about flying by the seat of your pants, coming up with content on the go, sharing a thought you had, sharing something you read, sharing a quote that made your day. That said, not everyone needs to be tweeting 5 times a day. It can be quality over quantity as well. If you're posting tweets which are, of course, not that engaging, whether it's something like, hey, I drank coffee this morning because it's Monday and I'm tired, well, honestly, no one really cares about that. However, if you're tweeting something such as a story about buying coffee and the barista did something really nice, that's worth tweeting. Or if you want to tweet about the fact that you learnt a new fact about coffee and the type of ingredients it includes, or a new style of coffee you hadn't come across before, that's worth tweeting. So things that happen to you during the day that might be related to your industry that you've learnt, those are the types of things you've tweeted. But if you don't have time for 5 tweets a day, don't stress either. Some people might only tweet a couple of times a week. So don't be afraid of tweeting when you're able to. And again, if your target market isn't on Twitter, you shouldn't be devoting a ton of time to it. So it really comes down to building it up as and when you can and engaging with your industry and seeing how on average your industry tweets. So if everyone else in your industry is only tweeting once a day, it's probably safe for you to do the same, or even less if you feel it's relevant. Here's an interesting fact. On average, the average Twitter user spends 20 minutes per day on the platform. Unlike sites like Facebook, where people often scroll for hours looking at content and kind of getting sucked into their newsfeed, Twitter's more about going on, seeing the latest trends, seeing if anything interesting is happening, then going somewhere else. Those 20 minutes often aren't spent consecutively either. By that, I mean someone might check their Twitter feed for 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at lunch, and 5 minutes in the evening. So it's not just about grabbing them for that 20 minutes. And because the platform is based around time-friendly content, if you're tweeting at the wrong time of day, it's much less likely to be seen. So it's worth making sure that you've figured out the time of day that people are looking at Twitter and engaging with people around that time. I'll show you a trick a bit later where you can engage with them in multiple time zones without having to do new tweets all the time. Here's another big question. How do you grow your following and your reach on the Twitter platform? As I mentioned earlier, conversations are key. If you can reply to an interesting thread or a brand tweet or an industry thread and really get people engaging with your conversation, whether they're replying to you and your opinion or whether they're retweeting you, that is a great way to get yourself seen and often build up your following, as long as you've got something interesting and relevant to add to the conversation. Another big area, and it's underutilized, is lists on Twitter. Now, this is a list I made only a few months ago. And it's called Australian Farmers. And I've added a lot of people to it who are in the farming industry in Australia. Now, unlike following people, a list is a way of bringing together people on a certain topic to see all their content in a single separate feed. Great thing about this is you can have as many lists as you want, and that way if you want to only find out information on a certain topic from a certain group of users, you can quite easily make that happen. Now, as you can see here, it's already got 76 followers on this list because there weren't any lists out there already of Australian farmers. In fact, since I took this screenshot, I think it's probably got a few more followers as well. So it's worth creating lists, grouping people together. Of course, you want to add yourself to that list, so they're going to be seeing your tweets if they follow the list. But it is a great way to get seen and also engage with other people in the industry. Often they'll see that you've added them to your list, and they'll either follow the list or they'll follow you as well. So again, it's great in multiple ways to really increase the fact that you're seen around a specific niche area in your industry and engage with them as well. Following along. Now, I don't recommend following willy-nilly. Of course, that's not going to be useful because you're going to have all the people following you, and not all of them are going to be your target demographic or interested in what you have to say. In some cases, they might even be people who really don't like what you have to say. So instead, it's worth following along when you see people who are engaging conversation or have opinions or have things to say that are relevant to you or your industry. That said, on average, every Twitter user follows hundreds or thousands of people, as I mentioned earlier, because it fills up their news feed. So don't be afraid of following people, and many of those people will follow you back as well. And it is a great way to really engage with people, get them following you, but keep in mind there is no pressure for them to follow you back. So fill up your feed, but don't stress if they're not following you back as well. Just think about how you can have a quality feed where you can engage with them, start conversations, and grow your Twitter that way. So we're going to do a little wrap up, but I'm going to go over a few things that are worth knowing that you can take away with you as well, because I don't have time to cover all of them in this session since it is a general introduction. Here are some Twitter no-nos. Please don't syndicate tweets based on content from other platforms. You've seen the ones where every time someone does a Twitter post, it tweets a tweet that links to, every time someone does a Facebook post, it links over to Facebook. Or every time someone posts an Instagram image, it links over to Instagram. So in those cases, people get annoyed quite fast on Twitter and probably won't follow or engage with you because they don't want to go over to Facebook or Instagram. If they wanted to, they'd be on those platforms. So try and post native organic content on the platform, and that's the best way to engage with people on Twitter. If you're just posting content over from Facebook, you're really not making much use of the platform at all. As I mentioned earlier, don't use too many hashtags. If it's nothing but a giant tweet full of one short sentence and dozens of hashtags, that's ugly and not appealing. And most people aren't going to engage with that. Use important hashtags, but don't go out of your way to use generic ones like hashtag flag or hashtag tree. Try and think about how you can really use hashtags which will engage your intended audience and keep them simple and straightforward around your particular industry or topic and really niche them down as much as possible. Don't be tone deaf and be very aware of your audience. Here's an example from BMW where they asked what's the best way to get around town and still do our part to protect our environment. Unfortunately, it seems that according to this, the number one answer was not, in fact, my super sustainable BMW. Everyone was voting for public transport. So this is a case where it's worth knowing your audience and how they're actually going to engage. And keep in mind that not everyone following BMW can afford a BMW. So this tweet, of course, got quite a bit of engagement, but not necessarily for all the right reasons. Now, another big one is don't share too many links. And if you are sharing links, make sure that you're going to add your own comments to them. If you're simply sharing a link for the purpose of adding the title, that's not adding anything to the Twitter conversation. Instead, add your opinion, add your thought, even add a quote from the article that you found meaningful. Don't make it all about sharing someone else's work. Like on any platform, people follow you to see your opinions, your thoughts, and your content. So think about how you can craft a tweet to really show you or your brand. Another big one that can be quite an annoyance is if you're only retweeting other people's opinions. The problem with this is that, again, people are following you to find out what you've got to say. If you're always sharing what other people have to say, well, unfortunately, I'd rather go follow those people because they're probably more interesting than you because you've never told me what your opinion is. So it's okay to sometimes retweet from other brands and accounts on Twitter, but don't fill your feed up that way. Create your own unique content, or of course you can add your own opinion when sharing someone else's tweet. Here are some quick Twitter tips as well. Retweet your own tweets. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are different time zones when people are on, but for the most part, people only spend a short amount of time on Twitter per day. The great thing is that you can retweet or reshare your own tweet to your audience again and again. You can retweet, untweet, and repeat. What this means is if you share a really interesting tweet in the morning, you could go back on at lunchtime, retweet it. It will go back up to the top of the feed and your followers will get to see that again in real time. And you can repeat that maybe at a later time of day when you want to increase engagement again. As I mentioned before, don't engage if you can't take the heat. It can be a controversial platform, particularly if you start in on politics. There are some very opinionated people on that topic. Another one is use videos and GIFs as well as text. GIFs in particular are very popular. They're a great way to react and add to conversations, and you'll see them regularly used in response to different tweets on Twitter. And another one is retweeting something with a comment to add your voice to the discussion. When you click on the retweet button, there is also an option to add a tweet in addition to it. What that means is you can add an extra comment to the tweet and you can share what your thoughts, feelings, or opinions are on that particular tweet, which means you're not just sharing what someone else has to say, you're adding to the conversation. So, for anyone who's joined us, that is the end of this Twitter presentation. If you are here live, feel free to pop any questions you have into the chat box. However, if you're watching after, you can always connect with me over on Twitter if you have any further questions, or hit me up on any social media platform. I'm Susanna Birch on all of them. I do have a bit of an addiction to social media if you can't tell. However, hopefully that explains some of the basics of Twitter, how to use it, and what you should be doing from here. If you haven't already, as I mentioned earlier, Business Station offers 7 hours of personalized business mentorship for only $44. So it's a great deal. I'm a digital business advisor with Business Station, and I help people on all sorts of digital topics, whether it's SEO, social media, Twitter, of course, brand strategy, journal, ER, marketing, all sorts of fun things. But if you haven't already, it's well worth signing up for. So that is the end. Thank you very much for joining us. We don't have any questions in the chat, which usually means that I covered the topic well enough that I didn't confuse anyone. So thank you very much for following along. I'll leave you to it. Have a great night, and hope to see you all over on Twitter.